Hey everyone, welcome back to Crime Weekly News. I'm Derek Levasseur.
I'm Stephanie Harlow.
And this is going to be episode number 2, Crime Weekly News. Real quick, we appreciate all the support in the comments. It seems like you guys really like this. We're glad you like it because we're enjoying the idea of getting to do something like this as well. Gives us an opportunity to weigh in on things that are currently in the headlines without having to do a deep dive, which isn't always possible when these cases first emerge. So this is a different outlet for us. We're glad you're enjoying the content. I guess it's always weird to say that, but that you're getting where we're going with this. So that's good.
Yeah. So today we are going to talk a little bit more about the University of Idaho murders because from last week to this week, the probable cause affidavit or the arrest affidavit was released. So now we kind of know specifically what led law enforcement to Bryan Kohberger. And we kind of want to discuss that a little bit so we can keep everybody updated because, I mean, I think even we had some people in the comments of last week's video saying they had never even heard of the case before. So there are people out there who are following every new update that comes out about this case, but there are some people who are really depending on, you know, YouTubers and things like that to deliver them the latest information. So that's what we're going to do. And I kind of pulled 3 or 4 key takeaways out of this affidavit. And the first one would be the DNA. And we had speculated on it last week. Where did they get the DNA from? How did they take the DNA allegedly that they found at the crime scene and connect it to Bryan Kohberger? You had thought maybe there was some genetic website or something involved, but it turns out the DNA was allegedly found on a tan leather knife sheath. And this knife sheath was left at the scene of the crime. It was apparently recovered from one of the victim's beds. I think it's interesting that the knife sheath seemed to be a Marine Corps knife sheath. So that's interesting. I wonder if somebody that he knows or maybe his father or something was in the Corps.
Those K-bars are super common.
Oh, with the USMC globe and insignia stamped on the outside of it?
You can buy them. It could be a Chinese knockoff. They're
really?
Super common. We've seized hundreds of those. It's a very common knife it's a cool looking knife. And so a lot of people buy them. It may not be a genuine, U.S. Marine Corps knife that was distributed by the military. You look online, you can find a million of them. Not saying it's not a legit one, not saying it couldn't be whatever, but it could also just be one he bought off Amazon.
Well, his DNA was found on the button snap of that knife sheath, which is crazy. It's such a small, tiny place. And most likely, even if he had worn gloves during the act, this clearly was a knife that belonged to him that he'd handled before. And maybe he thought he'd cleaned it off completely before using it, but he missed that little tiny crevice on the button snap. So then they took that DNA and they went through the trash at the Pennsylvania home of Bryan Kohberger's family late in December. And so the results from the Idaho State Lab for DNA testing showed that the DNA profile obtained from the trash matched the DNA found on the sheath, and the DNA in the trash was identified as male. And basically they're saying that this was the biological father of Bryan Kohberger. So, because that's who lived there, and that's how they're able to figure out that the DNA on the knife wasn't Bryan Kohberger's father, but more likely was Bryan Kohberger's. Now, it's interesting because I read an article where they basically said, this guy seemed to be really doing his homework and trying to figure out how to pull off, the perfect crime in a way. So how would he make such an obvious mistake as this, leaving behind the sheath of a knife? And there was a retired FBI profiler, Mary Ellen O'Toole, and she said, quote, "Leaving behind the sheath of a knife was clearly a mistake and could have happened for several reasons. The suspect may have had to use the knife right away, pulled the sheath off too quickly, or the victim's response may not have been what the suspect anticipated. The offender was also likely in a state of arousal during the commission of the crime, and their attention to detail would have waned, at least somewhat causing him to make mistakes." And I think we did touch on that when we talked about this last week. It's one thing to plan out the perfect crime. It's another thing completely to be in the process of committing this crime when it's your first time. You think you might have it all laid out, but you're going to encounter things you didn't expect. And you're just, you're not used to being in a situation like that. So I think Brian Koberger is probably somebody who thought he could pull this off flawlessly, but prove to himself and everyone that he's not that person.
Yeah, I mean, stress will do a lot to someone. Like you said, you can plan it out, but when you're in that situation, especially if things don't go exactly according to plan, and we can end it with this when we do this segment, but I do have an opinion on the affidavit as far as the witness testimony and what it could mean about what happened that night, what actually occurred in that household. But yeah, when things don't go according to plan, you have to call an audible in some cases, and you can lose sight of certain things that you brought with you and completely forget that you even had them, the sheath being one of them.
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is the fact that one of the surviving roommates actually saw this guy leaving.
Right.
So when I did this case on YouTube, the way that I and a lot of people thought the house was set up was that the two girls who were friends, Kaylee and Madison, were on the third floor. Underneath that, you had Zaina and Ethan in the same room because they were dating. And then on the first floor, you had the two surviving roommates. And everybody kind of said that makes sense because on that second floor, you've got the glass sliding door that we believe is how the suspect entered. And so maybe he didn't even know the first floor was there. And so he didn't know that there was two more people in the apartment or the house. So that kind of made sense. But now what we're kind of finding out is that one of the surviving roommates was on the second floor with Xana and Ethan. And she told law enforcement that she saw a masked man, and he was wearing a mask. It was covering his nose and his mouth. He was wearing all black, and he had bushy eyebrows. And he basically walked right by her and then walked out or walked towards the glass door, at which point law enforcement believes he exited. She said she just kind of froze in fear and then went in her room and locked the door. Now, according to the timeline that's revealed in these documents, law enforcement believes that the murders happened between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. We've got Xana. She had a DoorDash delivered to her around 4 a.m. And then the surviving roommate said that she woke up around 4 a.m. because she thought she heard Kaylee on the third floor above her playing with her dog. So maybe she heard scratching or something above her. And then a short time after this, she said she woke up again because she thought she heard Kaylee say something like, "There's someone here." But in the probable cause affidavit, they said this also could have been Xana saying that because we know that she was awake at this time because records show she was on TikTok at about 4:12 a.m. Now, the roommate said that she looked out of her bedroom window when she heard the comment about someone being in the house, but she didn't see anyone at that point. But then she opened her door again when she heard what she thought was someone crying in Xana's room. Now, at this time, she said she heard a male voice saying something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Now, according to this document, the roommate opened the door a third time, and that's when she saw this man, this figure in a mask. And we have another sort of timeline notch here at 4:17 a.m. There's a security camera that's on the outside of the house, but it's less than 50 feet from Xana's room. And at 4:17, it picked up the sounds of dog barking, which probably was Kaylee's dog on the third floor, and then distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper followed by a loud thud. And this is the crazy thing that I kind of picked up from the affidavit, which I missed when I was going through articles about the affidavit. They said there's a shoe print right outside the door of the roommate who said she saw Brian Koberger leaving the house, which they said kind of affirms the path that he took. But like a lot of people are saying, well, how did he not see her? And not only that, but why did she not immediately call the police when she saw somebody in the house that she didn't know, to the point where she said she was afraid enough to like go back into her room and lock the door. So she clearly felt, something was not right, so that she wasn't completely safe. Yet a 911 call wasn't placed until 11:58 a.m. So that's odd. Now, we did kind of talk about this briefly last night when we were discussing the affidavit, and you said you have some kind of idea of what you think happened.
Yeah, there's a few things that you said there that I want to touch upon. So first off, as far as the witness saying that she thought that she had maybe heard Kaylee because she had heard her earlier in the night, possibly playing with her dog. The detective, Payne, I believe his name is Corporal Payne, actually, he was quick to point out, because clearly just by what he's not saying in the affidavit, they believe that it was actually Xana that she heard, not only because of the DoorDash delivery, but also there's a couple other things which he didn't say in here, and they wouldn't because there's no way to prove it. But there's a couple, but I will say it, and it's purely opinion. Without going into too much detail, but it's in the affidavit. Both Madison and Kaylee were found in a single bed on the third floor. They were together, just without knowing too many details. By the way, that's where the sheath was found as well.
Yeah.
My guess is that they might have still been sleeping when this occurred. That's just my guess. And I'll say guess, not even opinion. It's purely a guess. However, they did point out in the affidavit that Xana was on the floor. She wasn't in the bed. Ethan was still in the bed. My guess would be that he might have been still awake a little bit. If she had ordered food for both of them, he might have passed out. But her hearing is someone there or someone's here. I would guess that she was probably saying there's someone here instead of, or she could have even said, we've all done this. Is someone there? Like yelling out into the hallway because they hear something. And unfortunately, she might have came out of the bed to check on who it was. And she encountered, allegedly, Brian. And that's where the first assault occurred because she was out of bed at that point, which means she was awake because he didn't move anybody else or allegedly move anybody else. So that would lead me to believe that what the witness heard was, in fact, Xana getting out of bed to see who it was. And she encountered the suspect. As far as the male voice, my guess, she's probably hearing the suspect. I don't think Ethan would have said, "Oh, I'll help you," unless she misheard them. But it could have been dark. Xana might have been like, "Who is that?" And this person could have said it as they were approaching her, and then proceeded to assault her in that moment. That's my best guess at that part. As far as the footprint, the way I interpreted the affidavit, and this is great police work, by the way, more so CSI than the law enforcement, there might have been something very, very light, barely viewable to the human eye, where during one of the assaults, the suspect got blood on their boots, or their sneakers. And again, it might have been very light, something you could just barely make out. So what they use is a presumptive blood test. They'll go over, they'll test that little area, and they will check it for blood, and it will come back on this little swab. It'll turn a certain color if there's blood in it. And then they can use this amino black, which is super cool in the DNA world, where they'll take it. So even though it's not visible to the human eye, this by no means am I an expert, this chemical reacts to the proteins in the blood, and it will actually turn the entire stain like a black, but it's almost more of like a blue, to be honest, from when I've seen it. And it enhances whatever is there, even if you can't see it with the human eye. And clearly it enhanced it enough where they could actually see a pattern of a bottom of the sole, the sneaker, and they believe it might be a Van sneaker,
Vans, yeah.
Which they don't go on further in this affidavit, but I'd be willing to bet you that they searched the house for his sneakers. He might have dumped those sneakers if he's smart in any way, where he did some other things we're going to talk about as far as trying to avoid detection later with his license plates and stuff. So he might have dumped the sneakers based on some of the other things he did. But if he hadn't, that would have been another thing to add to the equation as far as finding him to be involved. So those were a few things there. The thing I wanted to discuss specifically was the order in which it happened. To what you said earlier, I don't know if we're going to get into motive. I'm sure police have an idea. You don't need motive for a murder conviction. It's always nice for prosecutors as far as telling the story. But it's regardless of what the motive is, it's not going to make rational sense to any of us, because what he did allegedly is not something that most of us are going to be able to understand, because it's not going to justify what happened. So my guess would be he had been casing the place for months, probably for Kaylee, or probably for Madison, and maybe he didn't expect to be encountered by Xana and Ethan. That's my guess. I don't know if he would go there with the plan on killing all four. I don't think we'll ever know, because I don't expect him to admit to this or confess to it. But it seems like, although he did have some of it planned out, and it seems like he did a little bit of surveillance prior to it, the research wasn't great, because I don't know how, based on his knowledge of past crimes, he would expect to go into a house and control a situation with 4 people, potentially even more than that, and expect not to encounter someone who may fight back and may cause him to have to change up whatever methodology he had planned on carrying out. So I don't know. I don't know if he would go in there knowing 4 people were in there sleeping at that time, even though if he had done any surveillance beforehand, he would have known that all 4 of them, including the extra roommate, the witness, they were all home by 2 a.m.
That's what I'm saying. I think that he may have been drawn to that house because of one person, but I think he went there knowing he was going to kill more than one person. I think he just wanted to do something huge and put himself in the news, see himself in the news the way he saw probably a lot of these serial killers that he looked up to in the news.
Let me throw something at you there.
Yeah.
If that's the case, though, and you're trying to kill as many people as possible, are you not going and checking other rooms before you take off?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Why do you think it is that this roommate said she's standing there? He walks past her. The way that the affidavit makes it seem, that footprint was directly outside her door. So he was pretty close to her door. I think he probably saw her. And at that point, he was like, maybe this went wrong. And, it didn't go exactly the way I thought it was going to go. And I've got to get out of here now. The dog's barking. Shit's happening. I got to go. So I can't really hang around and continue. I know you probably think he didn't see her, but it feels like it'd be very hard based on the proximity of his footprint so close to her door that he didn't see her.
No, it's actually very plausible. So there's a YouTube video, and I apologize. I don't know the name of it. I'm not trying to not give them credit. If you look it up, you'll see it. Someone DM'd me about it. Leah DM'd me about it. Shout out to her for sending me that way. She sent me the link. Essentially, they recreated like a virtual tour of the apartment complex. And the way it is, first and foremost, it's 4:00 in the morning. So it's dark. It's very dark in the house. It's not that easy to see, especially if you're not familiar with the house layout. And the way that this roommate's room is located, it's off to the left. He has to make a hard right turn, regardless of whether he was coming from the 3rd floor or the 2nd floor. And I do think he was in a rush because he didn't intend on it going down the way it did. He had to do more work than he expected going in there. So he's trying to get out. And I think he completely missed her. I don't think she was standing in his pathway where he moved her out of the way, or him. We don't even know if it's a male or female yet, I don't think. And even if we do, it doesn't matter.
Roommate's a female.
Roommate's a female.
Yeah.
And I hope they keep her under wrap because there's some weird stuff going on.
Her name's out there already. Yeah.
Okay, it's ridiculous she to say that she's involved. But that being said, the way that I watched the whole virtual tour, it's very plausible that he came down from the 3rd floor or around the corner from the right, makes a hard right to go out the sliding glass doors and never sees her. Because again, if the lights aren't on and he's not completely familiar with the layout of the house or expecting more than who he thought was there to be there, he's already killed more people than he intended on doing, if that was his motive. And he's trying to get out of there as fast as possible. He's got tunnel vision on the sliding glass doors. She's in her room still and not really completely visible. Her door might have not even been completely open. And
she could have just cracked it and like peeked through it.
He looks out and it's dark. I mean, even walking through my own house sometimes, you stumble into things that are there. You see him every day. So it's very possible that he just didn't see her at all, because if he had seen her, I strongly believe, I am very confident he would have killed her.
Yeah.
Because the number one thing is you're not going to leave witnesses behind. So even on his way out, if he's abruptly running out and she had confronted him, he's still got the murder weapon. They never recovered it. He's going to kill her. The last thing he's going to do is leave an eyewitness to identify him. He absolutely did not see her. And that's why she's still alive. And thank God for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was also thinking about, her hearing that male voice saying like, oh, it's okay, I'm going to help you or something like that. I almost wondered if it was one of two things. Did you read in that affidavit where they said that Brian Koberger was like trying to be a police officer? So was he, it was like in the last page, but was he pretending to be a police officer at that point or some like authority figure? Maybe Xana got scared. Maybe she heard something happening and he's like, don't worry, like I'm going to take care of it. Just keep calm. And he's trying to act like an authority figure. Or was it Ethan who was kind of joking around? When your girlfriend or your wife gets scared and is like, oh, someone's here. Oh, don't worry, I'm going to take care of you. Ha ha ha, kind of a joke. It could have been one of those two things.
The thing that makes me think that it wasn't Ethan is because he's still in bed. So obviously if he's going to let me help you, I think he would have got up.
And no, he's just joking, it's like that's the whole point. You're kidding, like no one's here, calm down, like I'll take care of you, don't worry about it, Mingya, every time I hear somebody in the house, I'm over like shooting out of the bed. I got the baseball bat and I'm like, Adam, someone's here, and he's like, don't worry, I'm here. You think he moves his ass out of the bed? Absolutely not. No.
So, we're different. We're definitely cut from different cloths because I'm out I got the firearm in the hand. I'm ready to go. I'm in my boxers with the flashlight on.
Well, I also think I hear people entering my house every night. So maybe,
That house, from what I understand too, had a lot of foot traffic going through it. A lot of people living there. So it probably wasn't uncommon to have people coming and going at late hours. And truly, again, I'll never be able to prove this. But I strongly believe that it might have been Xana saying, someone there. And then she sees this silhouette character. It lights her off. And he might be a foot away from her at the point where he says, "Don't worry, I'll help you.
Don't worry. Yeah.
And that it's over at that point. And
just
that's why she's not in bed
throw
anymore.
her off and confuse her so that he has time. Yeah.
Why wouldn't? You're not going to assume that this person's there. It could be just someone who was visiting one of the other roommates for all you know. So it wouldn't take much to confuse you just for that second for him to close that gap.
Yeah.
And that's why she's out of the bed when law enforcement finds her. That makes perfect sense. But law enforcement, by the way, they're not going to say that in the affidavit because it's opinion and it's irrelevant. And you don't want to start throwing things in there that you can't prove with evidence.
Yeah. Well, I do think that he probably knew who exactly lived there. So I definitely think he knew that there was 2 other roommates there.
I agree.
The cell phone data showed that he was near that house at least 12 times before the murders, dating as far back as this past August. So, and all of these times, except for once, were very late at night or very early in the morning. And we do know this was a party house. He could have at any point strolled into any one of these parties they had. It's an open door. I mean, I remember college parties. It's like you kind of just show up. You don't necessarily know the people, but you might know someone they know. He was young, college age. Nobody's going to look at him twice. So he could have just strolled in. But I definitely think he knew he was there enough to know enough information about who lived there. Now,
I agree.
On the night of the murders, though, his phone was tracked heading towards Moscow before the attack, but then his phone was turned off from 2:47 a.m. to 4:48 a.m. And I do believe that's one of the things you're indicating that he was trying to hide himself and kind of like make sure he wasn't, even though you're heading there. And then the next morning after the murders, his phone's back at that house between 9:11 and 9:12 a.m. So he's going back to the house probably at that point to see, were there any police officers there? Had anybody called 911 yet? Were the bodies discovered? And we know that they weren't because the 911 call didn't happen until almost noon by that point. So he was kind of checking on his work, which is crazy. And then the other thing he did to sort of try and hide his involvement was the fact that his white Hyundai Elantra was caught on surveillance footage entering. It went by that house 3 times that night, and then it entered that area again for the 4th time at 4:04 a.m. And he went ahead and he registered his car in Washington State 5 days after the murders, at which time he received a new license plate, hoping that probably threw them off because before his car had previously been registered in his home state of Pennsylvania. So now he's re-registering it. He's getting a Washington State plate instead of a Pennsylvania plate, but they still found him.
Yeah, it was great police work. It really was. I mean, that's what leads me to believe this was thought out. There were some things that he did where he thought he would be able to avoid apprehension, the shutting off of the cell phone, the changing of the plates. This was all things that he intended on doing from the start. And that's why when you think about the sheath, it's because, I don't know, without seeing the sheath itself, a lot of the times they have like a button hook that you can hang it from your belt or your jacket. It might have come undone during the assaults. It could have been in his hand. And because he had tunnel vision on whatever he was doing, he dropped it and not realized that he had dropped it until after the fact. Maybe he thought about going back in and getting it in that morning and decided against it, and that's why he went back there. But yeah, I mean, the entire thing, what law enforcement did with this, it really was good. And we could sit here and talk about it for probably a couple hours because you could really dive into the details. But between the DNA profile that they obtained from the button of the sheath, okay, they put that aside. They cancel it all against anybody who's currently in the home. So they know they have a single DNA profile from a male subject, doesn't match anyone that was in the house. Okay. That's number one. We got a DNA profile. Then they have this car. They go through the FBI specialists that deal with vehicles. They find out potential make and model based on the video. Then they find some more video of a vehicle that was on campus. They do a search of a vehicle that matches. So they put out a BOLO. We do this all the time. When we were in narcotics and we were doing homicide investigations, if we had a potential vehicle, we would put out an internal BOLO for all law enforcement. They saw a vehicle matching the description. You stop the vehicle, you release them with a warning, but you identify everybody in the vehicle. Well, that's exactly what they did. I believe they stopped his vehicle in December after identifying it and realizing that he had changed the plates. but they were able to get his information. They were able to get his phone number during the traffic stop. And eventually, based on the information they had, and this was during a traffic stop before this whole incident, by the way, they stopped him, I believe, in August. And that's when they got the cell phone data from the cell phone number from what I saw. And so eventually they get the cell phone data. And then what they're doing from a visual perspective is they have this Elantra from the night in question where they believe it's a suspect vehicle. And they're essentially able to overlay the video that they have from this Elantra that night, the path that it took. They're able to overlay it with the cell phone coordinates that they do have from Kohberger. And they're basically able to time it up where they can see the Elantra heading back to Kohberger's residence and time it up with the cell phone data. So it shows not only that this is probably your car, but that whoever's driving the car has Kohberger's cell phone as well. So kind of puts two and two together. It's a really good job.
Yeah, I saw that in the affidavit, the pictures and the kind of like geographical, like topographical maps that they were overlaying. Very, very cool. It does seem like he kind of was casing the place even that night. So yeah, it kind of almost seemed right like he was waiting for everyone to get home. Maybe I'm not sure, or waiting to like see lights go off to know that people were like settling in for the night. I'm not sure why you would continue. Why would you have to be driving by that house 4 times that night? Maybe he was trying to summon the courage. I'm not sure. But it did seem like he was kind of knew who was inside and waiting for everyone to turn in and be less aware and be less, awake. And that's kind of what was happening there. But I don't know.
No, it's we have to obviously let this play out in court. Kohberger's has a right to due process. I will say this, and this is he's innocent until proven guilty. Based on what we have here, you have a potential murder weapon sheath that clearly didn't belong to that household, with his DNA profile on it, his vehicle, his cell phone coordinates, his I'm assuming if they're gonna probably try to find out if he owned a pair of vans. He has an uphill battle, and it's my opinion that he was definitely at least one of the guys. I don't know if there were multiple people, but he was definitely involved. Again, purely just opinion. And I will say, I don't say this often, but there was some criticism about law enforcement that they weren't really releasing it a lot at first. Mm-hmm. But let's use this as an example that not all the time when law enforcement isn't saying anything, they have no clue what they're doing. They may just be putting it together. And now you're getting a kind of a pullback behind the curtain when all these things, if you go back and look at some of the experts online, were saying they have no clue, this is going to go cold. These are just a small couple things they were doing behind the scenes that none of us knew about. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying it's always the case, but it is promising to know that when the police aren't talking, it may be a good thing because maybe they're onto someone. So you just got to give them a little bit of time. And I'm happy for the family. I saw an interview with one of the parents, the fathers, and he was quick to say, I was very critical of the cops. And I told them directly, prove me wrong and I'll apologize. And he's like, I already have, because this is a great case and they did a great job, and I appreciate everything they did. So not that there's anything positive about the situation, but it's good to see science and technology start to catch up. And even when you have a guy who's a PhD student who thinks he's smarter than the cops, right now he's in an orange jumpsuit. It's nice to see.
That doesn't fit him, by the way, because he's so scrawny.
It's way too big for him, right? Yeah. But you know what I think it is? He's got so many, I think he has a bunch of body armor on underneath it. Mm-hmm. So they probably had to make it, gave him a bigger size because not only is he on suicide watch, so they have to protect him that way, but also you never know if one of these parents, because I got to be honest with you, I'd probably be one of them. Mm-hmm. If they get a shot at him, then he's not going to be going to court. So, or you could just have a vigilante who just wants to, take him out. So that jumpsuit might be for a reason. He might have a lot of protective armor underneath it. So, but overall, I want you to
allow me to see him as the scrawny little weak bitch that he is. Can I just see him like that for a second? You don't have to give me logic, okay? Because I definitely think that this dude, is good for it. I mean, I obviously innocent until proven guilty, whatever. But come on, let's all be honest here with what's happening. And yeah, nothing positive came out of this. But at least these parents don't have to go 10, 15, 20 years never knowing who's responsible for what happened to their kids. They may never understand why. Like you said, that motive may make no sense to any of us who has a brain in our heads, right? But at least they'll know who, and they don't have to feel these cold cases that just go for decades and they never have answers. And that's the most positive thing we can get out of it, I guess.
I agree. This will probably be the last time we covered this for Crime Weekly News for a little bit, unless there's something breaking. We wanted to cover the affidavit because everybody was talking about it, and we had just covered it last week. This literally came out like a day later. So we covered this. We'll wait for trial to take place. We'll see what happens during trial, and then maybe we'll follow up with it. But we'll probably change it up going forward next week. But obviously, we're hoping the best for the families and for law enforcement and prosecution as they prepare to take this to trial, because I'm assuming that's what's going to happen, and we'll see how it all plays out. Any final words from you?
No. Just let us know what you think in the comments if you're watching, because I'm interested in what you think about this whole process. And if you guys kind of wanted to touch on anything from this affidavit that we didn't talk about and give your opinions, because I'm definitely think like the hive mind is really needed here. The more opinions, the more information we have and what's going on in our heads, the better, because it's very difficult to kind of piece through this. So I'm definitely interested to hear what you guys have to say in the comments. Thank you so much for being here with us, and we will see you next week on Crime Weekly News.
Absolutely. Stay safe, everybody. Bye.
Bye.